This is your reality check.
Welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. Today is December 20th, 2020, and I'm producer Pat. We have three interesting segments for you today. Dr. Stuart Robbins is going to give us an update on a segment Adam did on episode 602 about headlines suggesting we may have found life on Venus. Adam is going to talk to us about so-called suicide cords and Christmas lights, but first Stuart Robbins answers a question about why we have 2 high tides a day instead of just one. Stuart is a research scientist who studies planetary geophysics with an emphasis on impact craters. Before that, though, our friend and frequent TRC contributor, Dr. Stuart Pharamond, has a new book out, and we'd like to give a copy to one of you. The book is called The Science of Living in the UK, but here in North America, it is called Live Your Best Life. We'll be having him on in the new year to talk about it, but in the meantime, here is Stu with a question to win a copy of his new book.
To be in with a chance to win a copy of my new book, Live Your Best Life, try to answer this question. If you woke up at 7 o'clock in the morning, when would be the best time for you to drink your first cup of coffee if you want to get maximum effect from the caffeine?
Okay, so in the past we have given prizes away to the first right answer, but this time what we're going to do is take all correct answers that we receive in the next 2 weeks and pull a name from a hat. So send us your answer to info@trcpodcast.com before midnight January 3rd for your chance to win a copy of the book. One other thing I wanted to mention is that when we record with Stu Robbins in an interview style, we usually have a bunch of topics we want to ask him about. Stuart is a really busy guy, so when we can get some of his time, we try to record as many segments as we can. That was the case yesterday, and it explains why Stu mentions that he's not sure when segments will be part of the show. Last thing is that this will be our last show of the year. I hope everyone out there has a safe and happy holiday season, and we will talk to you in the new year.
Let's kick off the festivities with an email from friend of the show, Dana Peters. Now, Dana has been a guest on TRC a few times and is also the creator of the popular phone app, Planets. Here's his question or email. Here's a suggested question for Dr. Stuart Robbins. Why are there 2 high tides per day rather than 1? I'd like him to take a shot at this question because I created a 7-minute video that attempts to answer this question, but I'm not sure if I got it right. My internet research was somewhat inconclusive. Hopefully, I'm not adding to the confusion with an inaccurate video. As always, great podcast work. You guys are awesome. Thank you, Dana. So over to you, Stuart.
Yeah, so actually, we had discussed this several months ago, and I was too busy to actually do a recording about it. So when I was looking through my computer trying to find our discussion about it, I actually came across an email from Dana back in May of this year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, asking me about it. So I never responded because I'm really bad with email these days.
Ghosted Dana? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, I don't know if you can ghost someone if you never respond to them in the first place. So, sorry about not responding, whether it was ghosting or just not responding, but I hope that you don't mind a rather public response. So, unfortunately, there are some issues with your explanation of tides and forces. The video explains that astronauts appear to be weightless on the International Space Station, or the Vomit Comet, that is a big plane that tries to simulate weightlessness for tens of seconds. The video explains that people seem to experience weightlessness because there is a gravitational force of acceleration pulling you down, but then there is an equal and opposite acceleration pulling you up, and that's not actually the case. The reason that you experience weightlessness, or that you feel as though you are weightless, is because you are falling. You are falling in Earth's gravitational field, but you happen to be falling at the same rate as the vehicle around you. So it's more of a relative motion kind of thing. So the reason that you experience weightlessness is because in the space station is because the International Space Station is falling to Earth and you are falling with it. It just so happens that the International Space Station is moving across the planet and so falling at the same rate that the planet's curvature is falling away. And so that's why it stays at about the same altitude or elevation above Earth's surface the entire time. But it is falling, and that is what's going on, is you are under Earth's gravitational field. There isn't really a force pushing you in the other direction. It's just that you feel as though you're weightless because your vehicle is going at the same rate as you are. The reason why that's important is because the video that you created ends up using this to explain tides, and you don't have to get that complicated. The reason that we have 2 tides a day has to do with the Earth and the moon's gravitational pulls and their bodies and their inertia. So things want to stay in the same place unless they're acted upon by an external force, in this case gravity. So the side of the Earth that's facing the moon, you have water that is more easily deformed than rock, and so the water that is closest to the moon is going to be pulled towards the moon a lot more than the rock below it. Earth's center is going to be pulled towards the moon also, but it's not going to be pulled as far because the gravity at Earth's center from the moon is less than the gravity at Earth's surface. In other words, the water that's towards the moon. So Earth is also pulled towards the moon, just not as much. Now, with that said, the water on the opposite side of Earth also wants to get pulled towards the moon, but the moon's gravitational pull is even less there. And so what effectively happens is that water gets pulled towards the moon, but a little bit less. But because Earth is being pulled towards the moon a little bit more, that water almost effectively gets sort of left behind in space. And so that's why you have a high tide towards the moon. The moon's gravity is pulling the water towards the moon really, really a lot. Earth is then getting pulled towards the moon, but not as much. And then the water on the other side is sort of both left behind and pulled towards the moon a little bit. And so that's why you have 2 high tides. You don't have to get into complicated force diagrams or accelerations this way and that way. It can just be explained through that.
So, Stuart, one question I have, not really related to the tides, but something you said about the ISS, the International Space Station. You said that it's falling, but the vehicle's moving at the same rate as the curvature of the Earth. So, essentially, you're falling, but constantly missing the Earth? Is that the idea?
Exactly. I'm going to totally make up the numbers because I don't know them off the top of my head. Let's say that the ISS is moving effectively east to west. Again, it doesn't move directly east to west, but let's say it's moving east to west, and it's moving at 100 miles a second. I don't know if that's even close. Let's just say it's 100 miles or 100 kilometers a second, because this is a Canadian show. So it's moving across the ground at 100 kilometers per second, but it's also falling down at, say, 10 kilometers per second. But because it's moving across the ground at 100 kilometers per second, the ground itself, because Earth is a spheroid, is going down at 10 kilometers per second. So even though the ISS is falling down at 10 kilometers per second, the Earth is effectively falling away at 10 kilometers per second. So that's why you stay in orbit. I mean, the analogy is always a cannonball. Well, it's classically a cannonball. So you fire a cannon and it falls to the ground, but it goes maybe 100 meters. You get more gunpowder, and now it goes maybe 200 meters. It goes farther, but it still falls to the ground. You get a lot more gunpowder, and it then goes farther and farther, and it wants to fall, but Earth's curvature is falling away, and so it effectively keeps falling, but the Earth is falling away at the same rate, and so it goes into orbit.
What's up, cuboids? Christmas lights. There's a male end where the prongs stick out, and a female end where there are 2 slits in which the prongs can be stuck. The naming convention is oddly sexual for something so practical. So what happens when you need a double male-ended cord or a double female-ended cord? Is that even possible? I stumbled upon some memes on the internet talking about the dangers of a double male-ended power cord, and this puzzled me. How would such a thing even exist? Why would you need it? It seems people frequently look for such a thing when they're hanging their Christmas lights. No doubt, I'm not the only one who's hung their Christmas lights backwards. You drape them on a tree or around your house, and then when you go to plug them in, the side closest to the plug, oh, that's the female end. Can't plug that into an outlet. Looks like you need a cord with 2 male ends on it so that one goes into the lights and the other goes into your outlet. Now, despite what you may have seen in the film Requiem for a Dream, such a thing does not exist. But could such a thing exist? The short answer is yes. You could make a power cord that is 2 male ends. You could cut 2 normal extension cords. You could splice them together by either putting together 2 to 2 wires or 3 to 3 wires, depending if there's a ground or not. By doing that, you can make a cable with 2 male ends that could do the thing that you think it's supposed to do. But would it really do that? You can also put such a thing together with supplies sold at some hardware stores. So there are sometimes modular parts for power cords that would allow you to do this. But you shouldn't. Walk into any hardware store where the staff knows what they're talking about. They will discourage you from doing this kind of thing. So why is this a problem? Now, these cords are sometimes called suicide cords. I think the names may be a bit incorrect. Anyone who's putting together such a cord probably doesn't intend to kill themselves. So maybe calling them accidental death cords or something like that might be a more applicable name. But a strongly worded name probably gets the point across. So these can kill you? Can they really? How? So you should never have something that needs to be plugged in through a female end. It's just not made for that. It's made to string other lights together. So basically you have a male and a female end on a line of lights. The male end gets plugged into the outlet. And if you want to put another cord onto it, you plug it into the female end of that and you just keep going. But electricity is just flowing electrons. Does it really matter if they come from one end of the cable or the other? Well, it depends. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And if it's not done right, it can be very dangerous. When it comes to an electrical outlet, there is a hot live wire and then there's a neutral wire. And then sometimes there's a ground, but there isn't always a ground. So Christmas lights, often they don't have the ground, at least in North America. In Canada, we usually have 2 prongs with our Christmas lights. And if you live somewhere else and you have a different kind of outlet, maybe you call them fairy lights. Who knows? So plugging these lights in backwards so that 2 prongs go in the opposite hole isn't a great idea, but it probably won't make a big difference for some kind of lights. Depends on the lights. Older incandescent lights, they really don't care. It's electricity going through a wire in through a light bulb with a metal filament, which gets heated to give off incandescent light, which then gets filtered through a tinted glass bulb. If that electricity happens to flow in the other direction or the polarity is reversed or anything like that, it will still work if it's a battery, if it's direct current, alternate current, or whatever. This is why simpler devices don't have any sort of bigger or smaller prong. They can be plugged in either way. Other, more modern devices sometimes are not the same. An electrical motor, for example, may spin the wrong way if the positive and negative are switched when it's plugged into a battery, for example. It's not always going to be the same case with alternating current. Standard LED needs a certain type of voltage difference to light. This may not necessarily apply to modern LED bulbs. LED means light emitting diode. I use these extensively in electrical engineering courses in school. They're designed to block or allow current in one direction in a circuit based on the voltage difference. Versus the diode, it won't work. Now, the LEDs in your Christmas tree aren't made to be stuck on a circuit board, so they will still work if you manage to plug them in wrong, but I wouldn't count on it. Generally, if you have a plug which has a slightly bigger and smaller prong, you would be wise to plug it in as intended. So reversing this may have unpredictable or dangerous results, such as causing an electrical shock, a fire, or otherwise damaging the device. So if you're trying to plug it in and it just doesn't fit because you have it in backwards, don't force it, just turn it around. So, what about this suicide cord though? I want to simply ask the question, would it work? Because most sites were not answering this question. They were just saying, don't do it. So the cord may have some smarts in it to block such a setup, and if it's not an incandescent light, and you somehow plug the female end into a male end extension cord, it might work, but you shouldn't. That's a bad idea for a lot of reasons. Basically, the problem is that no matter how you cut it, somewhere in your setup, you will have 2 exposed prongs which are live. So if you plugged in the female end to the outlet, there's a male end on the other end of that cord, and it's just sticking out there. The prongs are very far apart. So if these 2 exposed prongs are on a Christmas tree, a simple piece of tinsel could cause a short. This is essentially the same as making a direct connection on the live and neutral electrodes. This can mean a great deal of current going through the lights or whatever is connecting them. This can heat wires, causing a fire. This can cause the tinsel to heat, start a fire. It could shock someone or something. This can cause your circuit breaker to cut out, a fuse to cut off. If a person happens to touch the 2 exposed prongs, they will be shocked. They will be hurt. And depending on where on their body those touch, they could be killed. So in theory, could a person cap the exposed male end of the lights and then use a male-to-male cord to light them? Maybe. Depends on the cord. It's still a very bad idea. If you don't have everything plugged in before plugging it into the outlets, you still have exposed prongs at some time. Unplugging it in the wrong order can cause damage. Depending on the lights, there can be some other problem. It can cause an issue. It can cause an issue with the lights. It can cause an issue with the electricity in your home. It's a very bad idea. So what do you do? If you do happen to put your lights on backwards, take them down, hang them up again. Yes, I know this will take a while, but this is probably unavoidable. Alternatively, you can run a series of extension cords to the other end of your light display. Now, this may seem impractical if the other end is on the top of a tree or on your roof of your house, but it is surely preferable to electrocuting yourself, wouldn't you say? Alternatively, one may ask, is there a double female-ended cable? Well, what would you do with that? It doesn't really make any sense. An extension cable with two female ends wouldn't be powered unless you were able to plug a double male-ended cable into it. If you somehow plugged your lights in wrong and you end up putting two male-ended plugs together, then there's actually another problem elsewhere in your setup, which is a female end which can't get to an outlet. So, address both of the issues by taking your lights down, thinking this through, putting them back up in the right direction, in the right orientation. Forgetting about Christmas lights for a moment, there's another time where people think they may want a double male-ended extension cable, and that's to backfeed power into a house from something like a generator. This is generally a very bad idea. So the basic idea, you have a generator which is generating power. It has a female-ended outlet on it so that you can plug something into it. Your house doesn't have power due to power failure or something like that. So use a double-ended extension cable to plug one end into the generator, the other into an outlet in your home. That power, in theory, can power other devices which are plugged in to basically the wiring in your house. This may work. It is also very dangerous. Hopefully it won't work. There are a lot of things that are set up to block this, but it may work depending on how your home's set up, depending on the age of your home, depending on how the electrical is set up. One possible problem, if the main breaker in your house isn't cut before you do this, there's a possibility of shocking a worker who's touching wires that are expected to be down. It could also damage the generator when power is returned. There's basically different levels of power that are competing, there's different phases, all sorts of things. So for example, if you use a 30 amp generator and you plug it in your house through a dryer plug and cause some lower amp wiring, which is there for normal plugs in your house, to have that electricity surging through it, that never should happen, heats up, catches fire, house burns down, not super fun. Your circuit breakers aren't in the right direction to handle it. All sorts of problems with your wiring could happen. It's a bad idea. All of the other dangers I mentioned for a double-ended male extension cord still apply here. Arcing and other issues could occur while you're trying to set things up. If you need to use a generator to power things in your home, you'll either need to plug them directly into that generator or have a professional electrician, which I am not, come in and set you up so that the generator feeds into your home's electrical panel and then things feed off of that panel. There's a right way to do this. There's a wrong way to do it. Double-ended male extension cable is definitely the wrong way to do it. It'll cost you money to have an electrician come in and set it up properly, but can we put a price on burning down your house or losing your life? You don't need a double male-ended electrical cable. That thing you think you need it for, you're missing something. Just don't. It's a bad idea. Even if you think you've covered all your bases, you might have missed something. Leave the electrical work to a professional. Make sure your lights are oriented the right way before you string them up. Peace out, cuboids.
Back in September on episode 602, which feels like a decade ago now, Adam looked behind headlines suggesting we may have discovered life on the planet Venus. I remember that segment quite vividly. It was really interesting to me. Now, more specifically, the news reported that a team of astronomers internationally found phosphine in the planet's atmosphere, which is a potential marker of life. Now, Stuart, last month, you flagged an article to us with an important update on this. So can you fill us in? What's up with Venus?
Yeah, so first off, I recommend that listeners who might be vaguely remembering this actually go back and listen to Adam's segment. I, perhaps like most of you, tend to listen in spurts, and so I was actually a few weeks behind when I listened to this episode, and I remember emailing or messaging you, Pat and Cristina, and saying, hey, was there ever an update that y'all did? Because this is way out of date. Like, it's only been a week or 3, but it's way out of date. The issue is that this is a big thing, and a big thing is going to attract a lot of attention. And it attracted a lot of attention from the media. It attracted a lot of attention from the pseudoscientists who are talking about how this is disclosure of aliens and various other things. And it attracted a lot of attention from scientists. And scientists are often more brutal to each other than the public is to them, or even than pseudoscientists are to them. And pretty much within a few hours of this coming out, there were already people who are scientists who study this stuff who were saying that this result was bogus. They weren't using those exact words. I'm paraphrasing it a little bit, but there was some analyses that were done really pretty quickly, like within the space of a few weeks, and hence by the time I listened to episode 602, I knew about them. And basically, the results aren't what they seem. So the gist of the first issue is that when the data were reanalyzed, even using some of the same computer code as the original authors, the signal of phosphine in the data completely disappeared.
Oh.
As in, yeah, there was just an issue with how they analyzed the data. So we talk sometimes about signal-to-noise issues, especially when you have me on. We talk about signal-to-noise and noise in your data and what's real versus what isn't. So signal-to-noise actually might be something that listeners are listening to right now, because I have a computer fan that's going quite loudly in the background, and so Pat is going to attempt to get rid of that. But in getting rid of that, he might introduce some noise in the signal. And if you turn up the sound on your speakers really loudly, make sure that you're practicing safe sound or whatever the phrase is these days. If you turn up that sound really loudly, you might hear some noise in the background, some crackling kind of stuff. That's noise on top of the signal of my voice. And what we want to do in astronomy is we want to get rid of all of that noise as much as possible. And some of the issue arose when these astronomers tried to get rid of some of that noise, is that it looks like they might have actually enhanced other noise. And that enhancement of that noise was a lot of their signal. So in other words, they looked at noise and thought it was a signal. So that's my understanding of one of the potential issues. Another potential issue is that the telescope itself, one of these telescopes that was used to actually try to confirm the signal that the scientists thought they saw, it turned out that that telescope had an issue with it. And it was actually taken down for maintenance in order to try to take care of this issue. And that when you go back and reanalyze the data accounting for that issue, a lot of the signal of phosphine also goes away, even if you do the analysis as the authors had originally done. So it seems like this signal of phosphine is not that real. Or if it is, it's much, 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 much weaker than folks thought it was. So the original signal was they thought that there was enough phosphine to be at about 20 parts per billion in the atmosphere, which is really small. That's barely, it's 20 out of a billion particles. But that much phosphine would be really hard to explain without life creating it, because phosphine is easily destroyed in Venus' atmosphere. In order to maintain that kind of amount of phosphine in Venus' atmosphere, you pretty much have to have some sort of active source, and for that much, the only way that we really know how to do it easily is life. Now, phosphine can be created through other means, such as volcanism. Active volcanism could be a way to do it. In fact, as we're recording this, the week that we're recording this, there was a big planetary science conference, virtual, of course, in the age of COVID, and there was a presentation about how phosphine could be produced on Venus through volcanism. Now, the issue was that it can't easily produce 20 parts per billion, but it can easily produce 1 part per billion, and it looks like with the reanalysis and all of the new corrections for the instrument, that that's an upper limit now. So the most phosphine on Venus in its clouds is about 1 part per billion based on this reanalysis. That is, as I said, an upper limit, and many people in the field now would argue that it's still within the noise and not really detected. It's not convincingly detected. So they did this, including the reanalysis of the new data. They went back and looked at archival data and did an analysis and just said it's not there. The response by the scientific community was, as I said, it was pretty fast. It took place in a matter of days, hours to days to weeks. And in one of the papers that came out that reanalyzed the data from these scientists, the authors actually wrote in their conclusions that the original authors should retract their paper.
Wow.
Like, I've never seen someone say it that directly in the published literature. Based on our analysis of so-and-so's data, they should retract their article. And I think their article was published in Nature or Science, one of the top journals in the field, and in all of science. And unfortunately, sometimes, children cover your ears, sometimes crap gets through because these journals want to make the headlines.
Right.
And they want to be the ones with those papers that are cited a lot. And so sometimes they will let some stuff get through, even if it's controversial or they didn't get quite the right reviewers. I was talking to some people and they're just like, I don't know how these reviewers let this paper get through. Peer review is a flawed process, but it's the best process we have. The way peer review works is you submit your article to a journal. I call it a manuscript at that point because it is not an article yet. You submit your manuscript to a journal, and the journal editor does an initial look through, looks for plagiarism and other stuff. And then based on the topic, if they think that it's a reasonable fit for the scope of the journal, because different journals have different scopes. So I would not submit a paper on craters to a journal on oceanography. So if it's in the scope and if it passes sort of those initial quality checks, do you have references? Do you have, figures, that sort of thing? Do you cite stuff that doesn't exist, like Santa Claus et al. 2001? If it passes those initial quality checks, then they will send it out for review. This is where they try to get anywhere from 1 to 4. Usually most journals stick with 2. Science and Nature, I think, go with 3. So they try to get anywhere from 1 to 4 people who are generally considered subject matter experts to review the paper. So if someone tries to submit a manuscript about impact craters, I am often asked to review it. Then what I do is I read through the paper and I go, does this make sense? Either earlier this episode or in a previous episode or in a future episode, we'll be talking about a video made by a friend of the show, Dana, who made a video about tides, and I talked about how it had some incorrect stuff in it, and that would sort of be a peer review kind of thing. I would go through and I would say, this is what's right, and this is what's wrong, and if I'm saying something is wrong, here's a citation for why it's wrong, or this figure isn't clear, you should remaster it because I can't tell what's going on. That sort of stuff is all done in the peer review process. Or you've cited a very recent paper, you should be citing the people who originally did this. All of these kinds of things happen. And then it goes back to the journal, and the editor says, okay, am I going to reject this? Am I going to have them revise it? Am I just going to accept it? And then the author edits it, and then they submit it again, and then it gets reviewed again. It's a very long and arduous process. I had a paper once take 1.5 years to go through this process. So what happened here is probably, they just didn't get the right reviewers. So, they either the right reviewers declined to review it, and so they've sort of had to dig really deep and find people who weren't necessarily as expert as they should have in either the data processing or the chemistry or something else. And it got through. Or the reviewers said, I don't think this is right, but perhaps I don't think this is right belongs more as a paper refuting this as opposed to they made methodological errors. So, for example, if someone in my field doesn't make any obvious errors in their paper, I just disagree with their conclusions, I might tell the editor, I don't have a problem per se with how they did anything, I just think they're wrong. With phosphine on Venus, we're down to probably a maximum of 1 part per billion, or nothing whatsoever. And 1 part per billion can be explained by geology. No need to bring in life. That doesn't mean there isn't life on Venus. That doesn't mean there isn't life in Venus cloud tops. It just means that this particular study is almost certainly very, very flawed.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter @TRC_podcast.
actually, you should just excise this entire thing because it has nothing to do with this topic.
Okay.
Did that help getting it off your chest, though,
rant
there,
aside.
Stuart?
No, there actually was a place to go with that, but it got...
We're like bartenders.
It went down a rabbit hole that doesn't need to be gone down.